I'm Rabbi Phyllis Berman.
And I'm Rabbi Waskow. The two of us together wrote a story called The Long Narrow Pharaoh and the Birth of the Passover People. And it's a story in a collection of stories we wrote together called Tales of Tikkun, New Jewish Stories to Heal the Wounded World. That's what the book looks like. And it's available actually from the Shalom Center. I'm director of the Shalom Center, which is producing this. Nick Alpers is doing the filming. And you can find the book on our by going to our website, which is www.theshalomcenter.org. So, ready to read?
Yes.
Okay. Long, long ago, there was a long, thin river. Along its banks, there was a long, thin country. And the country was ruled by a long, thin king. He was so famous for being long and thin that when people spoke directly to him, they called him not your royal highness, but your royal longness. But his name was Pharaoh, and behind his back, they called him Narrow Pharaoh. Pharaoh was long and narrow because he didn't like to eat. Eating is fun, he said, and kissing is fun, and laughing is fun. Being a king is serious. It's not supposed to be fun. Long and narrow is serious. But eating makes bulges. Bulges are not serious. No more bulges, said the long, narrow Pharaoh. I am long and narrow. My kingdom is long and narrow. And all my people shall become long and narrow. When I am not eating, no one shall eat. When I am not kissing, no one shall kiss. When I am not laughing, no one shall laugh. One morning, Narrow Pharaoh looked out the window. There was a chubby little baby laughing in the grass. The king began to frown. Babies make bulges too, he said. If you put a baby in a long, thin woman, you make a bulge in her. If you put too many babies in a long, thin country, you make a bulge in the country. I hate babies. They cry when I'm not sad. And they smile when I'm not happy. They eat when I'm not hungry. And they smell all the time. So Narrow Pharaoh went to his high, high throne. Up the steps he walked. 5 steps, 11 steps, 15 steps. When he looked very tall and very, very thin, he spoke in a very narrow voice. Send me my minister of exact justice.
The minister stalked in. He was almost as thin as the king, and his clothes were even thinner. He was almost as tall as the king, and his hat was even taller.
Tell me how to get rid of those extra babies.
The minister of exact justice raised an exactly shaped eyebrow. He raised it exactly 3/8 of an inch. Let the babies grow up to be children, he said. Then you'll be rid of them.
No, what good will it do if they're children? The children don't do what I say. They keep silent when I say speak up. And they whisper when I call for silence. They kiss when I say hands off. They loaf when I say get your work done. And they eat when I am not hungry.
So let the children grow up to be grown-ups.
No. What good will it do if they're grown-ups? The grown-ups do what I say, but they laugh at the strangest times. They work when I say work harder, But they laugh when I say, I work hardest of all. They fight when I say, join the army. But they laugh when I say, death is glory. They pay taxes when I say, make my palace richer. But they laugh when I say, if my own bed is soft, everybody sleeps better. It's good to have a big audience when I give speeches on the balcony, but there's so many people, they start talking to each other. It's good to have lots of soldiers when I need to march across the border. But there's so many soldiers, they might even join with each other and rebel against me. There's just too many people for my long, thin kingdom. Tell me, minister, get it right. What to do to win this fight?
And he glared hard at his minister of exact justice. Now the minister's eyes turned gray and his lips turned gray. He spoke very fast. Get rid of the extra people.
Ho ho, said the long thin king. Now that would be exactly perfect. Why didn't you say so before? And he threw a blanket over the minister's head before he could speak anymore. Then the long thin king called in his narrow voice, send my minister of exact numbers. Tell me, minister thin and tight, how to get these numbers right. How many people are extra?
So the minister opened his number file. Out came tumbling lists of numbers, numbers of soldiers, numbers of houses, numbers of taxes and numbers of milk bottles, numbers of bed sheets and numbers of numbers, innumerable numbers. The minister looked at all his numbers. He added them up and divided by 12, got a square root and subtracted 4. Exactly 600,000 extra people, he finally said. In that case, Your Majesty, said the Minister of Exact Justice in a muffled voice from under the blanket, I know exactly what to do. Up in the north are the crossover people. Just 400 years ago, a small band of them crossed over the Sea of Blood and started roaming around our country. They never settled down. They keep crossing over the great desert, coming here, crossing back, crossing here, going back. When we treat them like foreigners, they get very cross. And when we treat them like home folks, they get very cross. So that's why we call them the crossovers. They have lots of babies.
Narrow Pharaoh turned slightly green.
They have lots of children.
Narrow Pharaoh turned slightly red.
And their grown-ups laugh a lot at the strangest times.
Narrow Pharaoh turned slightly purple.
So they have grown and grown and grown. Last week, there were exactly 1,200,000 of them. You could get rid of half, and that would be exactly correct.
If they're so cross, let's double cross them. So Narrow Pharaoh looked down from his very high throne. Time to act! Which half of the crossover people should I get rid of? And he glared at the Minister of Exact Numbers,
who got out a page of records and began to read very nervously. Half of them are grown-ups, and half of them are children, and half of them are women, and half of them are men, half of them have black hair, and half of them have red hair, half...
Stop! Said Pharaoh. I know. I'll get rid of the men. The men make trouble. The men are strong, and the men are always laughing, and the men ask questions when I tell them what to do. But the women, they're pretty. They do what I say.
The Minister of Exact Justice frowned. He opened his mouth to tell the king that the women might not just do what he said.
But the king was grinning. His grin was so wide, the minister thought the top of his head might come off.
So the minister closed his mouth, and he looked extremely worried.
Now, get me the minister of medicine. Tell me, minister, long and thin, how to get rid of the crossover men.
Start with the babies, the minister said.
The king's face lit up. He felt even happier.
Said the ministers, bring in the midwives who help mothers give birth to their babies. Tell them to drown all the boys as soon as they're born. After a while, there won't be any men.
So Narrow Pharaoh clapped his hands, and in came two women named Shiphrah and Puah. Tell me, women, long and thin. But then his voice faltered, and he looked again at the women. They weren't especially long, and they weren't especially thin, especially Shiphrah, who was short and schmaltzy. Narrow Pharaoh looked itchy, and he shrugged. Kill all the boy babies of the crossover people as soon as they're born, said Pharaoh. And as for the girls and the women, let them alone. They're too weak to matter.
Shiphrah and Puah looked at each other. Pooh, whispered Puah. Who said we're so weak? Shh, whispered Shiphrah. Are you so sure we're strong? This is no time for talking. If we're strong, we can show it by acting. So they bowed to Pharaoh. Then they stepped backward and backward until they were out of the throne room. Shiphrah and Puah walked down a long, thin hallway and out the palace door. It makes me sad, said Puah. But I suppose the king is the king. We're supposed to do what he says. Maybe he knows what he's doing. Maybe he has facts we don't have. There must be something bad about the crossover people, or bad about boys. Shiphrah shivered, and they kept walking through a great broad meadow scattered with trees, oranges and bananas, plums and quinces. They kept walking through the meadow till it ended at a riverbank. When they got close, Shiphrah looked at the river and laughed. I thought the river was long and thin, but now I see it's broad. It wanders and curls and bulges. I can hear it laughing at Pharaoh. I can hear it singing. The Pharaoh is narrow and the river broad. I think we should learn from this water. Puah reached up to a plum tree. Its leaves rustled in the wind, and she leaned very close to hear its whispering. The tree is breathing, said Puah, and a plum fell plop at her feet. I think we should learn from this breathing, said Puah.
So Shiphrah sat quietly listening to the river, and Puah sat quietly listening to the wind. The two of them sat still for so long that a messenger ran up to say, "There's a crossover woman who needs your help to give birth."
Shiphrah stood up. She took Puah's hand. Together they walked slowly down the riverbank till they came to the crossover village. The mother was sitting in an open hut. Its roof was made of branches, and the walls were full of flowers. The mother shook and grunted and yelled. Shiphrah gently rubbed her back. Puah said, "The wind will teach us. Breathe deep. Breathe deep. Breathe slow. Breathe slow. Breathe deep. Breathe slow. Breathe deep." Shiphrah said nothing. But when the birth waters broke, she said, "The river will teach us," and held out her hands for the baby. The baby was born, a boy. Tears of joy poured from the mother's eyes, and the baby began to suck at her breast to drink her milk. Shiphrah looked at Puah. Puah looked at Shiphrah. Together they walked a little way off. They looked at the mother and the baby. Shiphrah finally spoke. "I'm trying to see the king's face, but I can only see the mother's face. I can see her face every which way, tears of joy, tears of sadness, the flow of the river in her eyes. Pua finally spoke. I'm trying to hear the king's voice, but I can only hear the baby's cry. I hear his voice over and over, giggling, gurgling, the flow of the wind in his breathing. Shifra listened to the mother suckling. Pua listened to the baby breathing. The king is strong, said Pua, but this breathing is still stronger. The king is rich, said Shifra, but this suckling is much richer. May this breath of life be king forever and ever, said Pua.
And suddenly, around them everywhere, they heard the breath of life. The palm trees were breathing. The crocodiles were breathing. The cat was breathing. The dandelions were breathing. The moon was breathing. Everything was breathing. The breathing sounded like this.
I will not stop this breath, said Pua. I will not stop this breath, said Shifra. And they turned and tiptoed out of the hut and out of the village.
8 days later, Narrow Pharaoh sent for Shifra and Pua. When they entered the throne room, his face was angry and purple. There are still boy babies in the crossover villages, he said.
Shifra and Pua reached out to hold each other's hands. I am a woman, and the mother was a woman, said Shifra. I could not kill her baby. I breathe, and the baby breathes, said Pua. I will not take away his breath.
I can take away your breath.
You can take away our breath, said Pua, but the whole world breathes. The king breathes, the kingdom breathes, in and out, up and down. Now you're up, but you will come down. If you stop our breathing, then your breathing will stop. The kingdom will stop. You can kill these births, said Shifra, but the whole world is born. The king is born, the kingdom is born. If you stop birthing, you will have no more births. Your aborning will die. The kingdom will die.
But I am the king. I can kill the whole kingdom. I can kill the crossover people and everybody else besides.
No, you can't, said Shifra and Pua. We will not do it. No one will do it. We will help them to breathe. We will help them to live.
There are too many of them already. My kingdom's full of them. We are tight. We are narrow. We have no space.
Then let them come out from your narrow place. Let them break through the red waters. Let them be born. We are midwives. We know it's time for a birth.
I will not. I will kill all of them, and I will start out with you, said the king. I will throw you into the sea to drown in its waters. I will cast you into the desert to die in its windstorms.
We are people of birth, not people of death, said Shifra. We will come to the sea, and its waters will break, and we will pass through them a-borning. Death will pass over us. We are people of breath, not people of death, said Pua. We will breathe in the desert, and death will pass over us all.
Pharaoh looked hard at them. They looked hard at Pharaoh. They turned to walk out of the room. But Narrow Pharaoh began to laugh. His laugh was ugly. It got louder and louder. It got screechier and scratchier. Suddenly it stopped. Where is my minister of exact numbers? Screeched Pharaoh. The minister appeared.
The minister's face looked gray and tattered, like an old newspaper. He took a piece of paper from his pocket and he muttered, 5,746 babies have died, and he disappeared again.
The king glared at Shifra and Puah. He snarled and he snickered. He snickered and snarled. Did you think you were the only way when I had to do some killing? A king has many hirelings when there comes a need for killing.
Shifra and Puah took a deep breath in and out. In again and out again.
Silently, they stepped backward into the doorway of Pharaoh's throne room, backward and backward, till they stood outside the palace door.
Shifra cried. Puah sighed. Puah patted her. Together they walked down the hill and across the meadow to the great wide river at the bottom. They sat at the edge of the water, watching it murmur and sob. Finally, Shifra said, "So the babies are dying anyway. We must do more to save them. What can we do?" "Talk to the women," said Shifra. "Women understand water and wells and tears and milk and the waters of birth and the waters of blood. The mothers, the girls, the midwives, the sisters, not just the crossover women. Even Pharaoh has a daughter. She will not like the business of murdering babies. And there will be others. We too are not enough. But with all of us women together, we can stop that king." Puah was quiet for a long time, and then she whispered, "What about the men? Only women are people of water, but both men and women are people of air, of breath, of wind. The king is killing the boys. It is really the men who are threatened. Why don't we talk with the men?" Shifra shrugged. Shifra snorted. "Men?" she said. "The king is a man. It's harder for men to wait." "Firmly," she said. "They are not used to giving birth. They're not used to knowing when the time is ripe to act and when the time is unripe. When it's unripe, they're afraid it will never be ripe. So they stay quiet out of fear, not out of waiting. And when they cannot stand waiting any longer, they explode. They force the time instead of growing ready for the birth. So they use a knife to fight back to make the birth happen." But Puah persisted. "The king is a man, but only one man," she said. "The king has forgotten how to breathe. But there are men who recall how to breathe. When my father held me close at his chest, he would breathe, and his chest would rise and fall. He knew about rising and falling. He knew about holding me close. He knew about air and breath. We must gather the breath of all life. I will not abandon the men. They must learn to birth with their wives. They must learn how to grow and grow until it's time to birth without killing. And then they must teach the women that even the knife can be used for life. The knife must cut the cord. The knife must hallow the next generation."
So they went to the women and men. They talked to the midwives, the fathers and mothers. They talked to the sisters and brothers. "We are no longer crossover people, for others will join us. We're a new people. We're just being born. We must have a new name. We must be the Passover people, so the death will pass over our houses." They met with shepherds and teachers. They met with the king's youngest daughter. They met with a family of dreamers. They talked and they laughed and they cried and they argued. They sang, they whispered, they waited, they grew. Some of the women said, "Yes." And some of the women said, "No." Some of the men said, "No." And some of the men said, "Yes." Most of the crossover people said, "Yes." But some of the crossover people said, "No." Most of the home folks said, "No." But some of the home folks said, "Yes." A few of the rich said, "Yes." And some of the poor said, "No."
So Shiphrah and Puah chose from the people they met with and said, when the moon is round and full, it is time for us to give birth. That night we will meet at the river.
So the moon began to swell, and the people began to stir. On the night when the moon was full, the people made a circle at the river. The moon was round in the sky, and the people were round on the earth. Shiphrah sat in the circle, and Puah sat across from her in the circle.
The two of them said together, when a mother is ready to give birth, there must always be one man and one woman with her. The men must learn to give birth, and the women must learn to cut the cord. You must go to the bank of the river, and you must sing to the water. Then Puah nodded to Shiphrah, and Shiphrah sang this song. You are the water of drowning, and you are the water of birthing. Today you must give birth to life. Today you make peace with our children. And then you must make the sounds of the water. Shh. Then Shiphrah nodded to Puah, and Puah chanted this chant. You must say to the air, you are the breath of the world. Our babies are born into you. You must be born within them, and then you must make the sound of the breath. Puah paused. She looked around the circle. Let us share our dreams, she said. Dream new.
One mother put her hand on her belly. I dreamed that my child will lead us all, lead us to pass over the desert.
One father put his hand on his knife. I dream that my child will teach us all, teach us how the knife can make holy, not dead.
A brother put his hand in the river. I dream that my sister will dance through the water to freedom.
A sister put her hand on the thorns of a thorn bush. I dream that my brother will see light in these thorns and give light to us all in our thorniest tangles. Shiphrah called out to the princess, the king's youngest daughter, and the princess said,
My language is different from yours. My words are different from yours. There's only one thing we share. That's breathing. Breathing comes first, before all words. Breathing comes last, when words are done. Breathing comes meanwhile. A breath is the word that includes all words. So our children will teach us to share our breath with each other, to share the breath of life.
And all the people said together,
This breath of life will make death pass over us all. This breath of life will make us the Passover people. This breath of life will become our king, and we will have no king. This breath of life will bring us out of slavery.
And all of them rose to go back to their houses to give birth to the Passover people.
When the moon was high in the sky, the people began to move. From cities and farms, from palaces and shacks, came a great stream of people, a river of people. From cities and farms came groans and shouts, a rushing breath, like women panting to give birth. The earth trembled. The houses shook. The people laughed. They sang and they danced.
They blew breath into the horns of rams and goats, and the breath came forth as wails and shrieks of music. They banged on drums and bells, and the blows came forth as rings and booms of music. They plucked on strings and puffed on flutes, and all the sounds came forth as tunes of music.
The world is upside down, they sang.
And then they turned somersaults. And when they came to the edge of a blood-red sea, the wind arose. The wind breathed in and out. The wind pushed and the waters rose. The wind pushed and the waters rose. The wind pushed and the waters broke. And the people danced across the sea.
On the other side, the people began to breathe together, making the sound of the wind. We will never forget the sound of this wind, this breath of life, they said.
I'm Rabbi Phyllis Berman.
And I'm Rabbi Arthur Waskow. And together we bring you the story that we've created from the story as it is in the Bible, the story of the long, narrow Pharaoh and the birth of the Passover people. We bring you the story from the Shalom Center.